Can goodness be taught? Seriously, if you want someone to be genuinely virtuous, truly good, can you send them to a class? Give them a book.
Or is it something else entirely?
Right. That fundamental question about virtue and whether it's something you can, learn is where our deep dive begins today.
And our source material for this dive takes us back to ancient Athens, to Plato's dialogue, the Meno. It's a really gripping conversation between Socrates and a young visitor, Meno.
Meno, yeah.
He walks in feeling pretty confident he knows the answer to that exact question.
Right. Meno arrives on the scene. He's young, he's well-connected, he's heard famous teachers like Gorgias lecture on virtue, and he seems ready to lay out what he knows. Our mission here is to unpack this back and forth, follow where it leads them, through frustration, confusion, a kind of wild theory.
And even a geometry lesson.
Yeah, even geometry, to see what light they shed on virtue, knowledge, and, how we acquire what's good.
Meno kicks it off directly, doesn't he? He just puts the question to Socrates. Is virtue acquired by teaching, by practice, by nature, or some other way?
Like a multiple choice test right off the bat.
Exactly.
And Socrates, in classic Socratic fashion, just completely throws Meno off balance with his reply.
He doesn't even try to answer the question.
No. Instead, he says he doesn't even know what virtue is in the first place. He claims he's never met anyone who truly did know.
And that's the famous Socratic ignorance right there on display. It's not necessarily him saying, I know absolutely nothing, but more like,
I know I don't have that deep, solid, reasoned understanding.
Precisely. A definition that can actually stand up to questioning. Socrates is basically saying, look, you're asking about the properties of X, but I don't even have a handle on what X is.
Which must have been incredibly disorienting for Meno.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially since he just said he's heard Gorgias on this. He thinks he gets it. So Socrates just flips it back on him. All right, Meno, if you know, tell me, what is virtue?
And Meno's first attempt, it's basically a list.
A list,
right. He says, there's the virtue of a man managing public affairs, helping friends, harming enemies.
Standard stuff for the time.
Then the virtue of a woman managing the household, obeying her husband. Then there's virtue for a child, an old person, a slave. He argues it's different for everyone, depending on their role.
He gives this whole swarm of virtues.
He does. And Socrates uses that brilliant analogy, the one about the bees.
Ah, yeah, the bees.
If you ask Meno what a bee is, and he just listed queen bees, worker bees, drones, and you'd say, okay, fine, those are types of bees. But what's the common nature? What makes them all bees?
What's the bee-ness of the bee?
Exactly. Socrates is pushing for that single form, the essence of virtue that underlies all these examples. He wants the universal definition, not just, a collection of instances.
And that move right there, that's like a key philosophical step, isn't it? Trying to get at the underlying reality behind all the different ways something shows up.
It really is. Foundational.
Okay, so Meno's a bit lost, but he tries again. Second definition. Virtue is the power to govern people.
Seems a bit more general. But Socrates immediately starts poking holes.
Like, does that apply to everyone? A child? A slave?
Right. If a slave had the power to govern his master, would that still be virtue in the way Meno means? And crucially, Socrates asks, doesn't this power need to be used justly?
Ah, the justice qualifier.
Meno quickly agrees, okay, yes, justly. So virtue is the power to govern people justly.
Seems better.
But then Socrates asks, okay, is justice virtue itself or is it a virtue?
Like one piece of the pie.
Yeah. Meno says it's a virtue, one among many. He compares it to roundness being a figure, but not the only kind of figure.
Okay. Where's the trap here?
Well, here's where it snaps shut. It's actually quite clever. Socrates points out that if Meno defines virtue as the power to do things with a part of virtue, namely justice, then he's defining the whole.
By using a piece of the very thing he's trying to define.
Exactly. It's circular. It's like defining figure simply as roundness. To understand that definition, you'd already need to know what figure means in general to place roundness within that category.
Wow, okay. So you can't use the concept you're defining in the definition itself. It doesn't help anyone who doesn't already get it.
Right. And Socrates kind of expresses his frustration, like we're back to square one. They're caught in this loop.
And you can imagine how Meno feels, this difficulty, this inability to just nail down a definition.
It hits him hard. He says Socrates has made him feel numb, paralyzed, like he's been stung by a torpedo fish in electric ray.
The famous torpedo fish. He says he used to talk about virtue all the time, gave great speeches apparently, but now, nothing. He's completely stuck.
He's reached aporia total perplexity.
But Socrates sees this differently, right? He doesn't think it's a bad thing.
Not at all. He tells Meno, look, I don't confuse you because I'm so clear and you're not. I confuse you because I'm just as confused as you are.
We're in this together.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is Socrates insists this state of confusion, realizing you don't know, is actually the essential first step for any real learning or inquiry.
You can't look for something if you're totally convinced you already have it.
Exactly. Perplexity isn't the end, it's the beginning, the necessary starting point.
But Meno, maybe he's feeling uncomfortable in this confused state. Maybe he's trying to wriggle out of it. He brings up this famous and honestly kind of annoying philosophical puzzle.
Ah, yes, Meno's paradox.
He asks, basically, how can you even look for something you don't know? You wouldn't know what to look for, and if you somehow stumbled across it, how would you recognize it?
And, he adds, if you already knew it, why would you need to look for it anyway?
It sounds pretty logical, actually, almost like a checkmate.
It seems airtight, but the conclusion is paralyzing. Inquiry is impossible. You just can't search for knowledge.
And Socrates calls it a tiresome dispute, right? He sees it as an argument that just encourages laziness.
Yeah, it completely undermines his whole project of philosophical questioning.
Okay, so they're really stuck now. They can't define virtue, and Meno's just argued they can't even search for a definition. How on earth does Socrates get past this?
This is where things take a really dramatic, almost mystical turn. Socrates introduces the theory of recollection.
Recollection, okay.
Yes, he pivots. He says he's heard from wise sources, priests, priestesses, poets like Pindar, that the human soul, it's immortal.
Immortal.
And it's lived many lives before this one.
Okay, reincarnation.
And here's the big leap. In those previous lives, the soul has seen and known everything, all knowledge, basically, about this world, the underworld, the whole shebang.
Wow, so the soul already knows it all.
That's the idea. Socrates proposes that what we think of as learning in this life isn't really learning something new. It's the soul recollecting or remembering the knowledge it already possesses from way back when.
Like jogging its memory?
Kind of. And because all of nature is interconnected, remembering one thing can help trigger the memory of other things too.
So how does this solve Meno's paradox about searching?
It answers it directly. You can search for something you don't consciously know in this life, because deep down, your immortal soul does know it from a past existence.
Ah, okay, so the knowledge is latent. It's in there somewhere.
Right. Inquiry isn't about finding something totally alien. It's about uncovering what's already within you. It makes the search for truth possible, even essential. It's an act of rediscovery.
That's quite a theory. How does he plan to convince Meno of this?
Well, he offers a demonstration. An experiment, really. He brings in an uneducated slave boy, one of Meno's own attendants, who happens to speak Greek but has never been taught geometry.
Okay, a live demonstration. What's the task?
The task is geometrical. Socrates draw the square, say 2 feet by 2 feet. What's the area?
4 square feet.
Right. Now Socrates asks the boy, what would the side length be for a square that has double that area? So an area of 8 square feet.
Okay, double the area. My first guess would be double the side. So 4 feet.
That's exactly what the boy guesses. It's the intuitive but wrong answer. Socrates draws the 4 by 4 square.
And the area is 16.
Right. 4 times the original area, not double.
So the boy is wrong.
And there's that moment again, the torpedo shock.
Mm-hmm.
The boy was confident. Now he sees he's wrong and he admits, I don't know.
He's perplexed.
Yes. And Socrates explicitly points this out to Meno. See? He's confused now. Isn't that better than thinking he knew when he didn't? Now he's actually ready to inquire. He's in that productive state.
So the confusion is necessary. Okay, how does Socrates guide him? Does he teach him the answer?
No, that's the crucial part. He claims he only asks questions. He uses diagrams, draws lines. He guides the boy to consider maybe a 3 by 3 square area 9, still not 8.
Still wrong.
Then he directs the boy's attention back to the original 2 by 2 square, specifically to the diagonal line drawn across it.
Diagonal. Okay.
And slowly, just by asking questions about the squares formed by these lines, Socrates leads the boy to see it for himself.
See what?
That the square built on the diagonal of the original 2 by 2 square, that's the one with double the area. Its area is 8.
Ah, the boy figures it out just through the questioning.
That's Socrates' claim. The boy arrives at this geometric truth, apparently without being told it, just guided to recollect it.
And this is Socrates' proof.
This is his demonstration of recollection, yes, he argues. The boy wasn't taught this geometry in his current life. The knowledge came from within him. Therefore, it must have been in his soul from a previous time.
It's a powerful demonstration, even if, maybe a modern cognitive scientist might explain it differently. But for Meno, in that context,
For Meno, it's designed to break the deadlock of the paradox and show that inquiry is possible because the potential for knowledge is already inside us.
okay, that definitely shifts the ground. So having sort of cleared that obstacle about whether learning is even possible, they loop back.
Back to the original question, can virtue be taught? Meno is still focused on that.
Right, so how do they approach it now?
Socrates suggests using a method like geometers do proceed by hypothesis.
Okay, a hypothesis, like an if-then
Y-
statement.
Exactly. He proposes, if virtue is a kind of knowledge, then it must be teachable.
Okay, that seems reasonable. We generally think knowledge is something you can teach.
They agree on that premise. Knowledge is teachable. So the whole thing now hinges on the next question. Is virtue actually knowledge?
So is it or isn't it? How do they tackle that?
Well, they start with something they can agree on. Virtue is good, right? And it's beneficial, profitable.
Sure, seems obvious.
But then they look at other things we often think are good, like health, wealth, strength, even qualities like courage or temperance.
Yeah.
Are these always good?
Not necessarily. Courage without wisdom could just be recklessness. Wealth without sense could lead to ruin.
Exactly. Socrates argues these things are only beneficial, only truly good, when they're guided by wisdom or prudence. Without wisdom, they can actually be harmful.
Okay, so wisdom is key to making other things good.
Right. And since virtue is always good and profitable, they conclude that virtue itself must be a kind of wisdom or prudence. It must be a form of knowledge.
Ah, okay, so they've reasoned their way to. Virtue is knowledge.
Yes. And if virtue is knowledge,
Then, according to their hypothesis, it should be teachable.
it should be, which implies there should
Yeah.
be teachers of virtue out there somewhere.
Right. If it's teachable, someone must be teaching it. But yeah, this is where they hit a wall, isn't it? A very practical wall.
A huge wall. Socrates says basically, okay, great theory, but I've looked around and I honestly can't find anyone who actually teaches virtue.
No teachers.
This leads into a really interesting and quite dramatic part of the dialogue. They bring in another character, Anytus,
Anytus. Isn't he one of the guys who later prosecuted Socrates?
the very same. He's presented here as a respected, influential Athenian citizen. Socrates turns to him.
Okay, what does he ask Anytus?
He sets up an analogy. If Menechana wanted to learn medicine, who would we send him to?
A doctor, obviously.
Shoemaking.
A shoemaker.
Right. And this agrees. You send him to the professionals, the people who practice the art, and importantly, often teach it for a fee.
Makes sense. So Socrates asks.
So Socrates asks, who should Meno go to if he wants to learn virtue? And then he cheekily suggests, maybe the Sophists.
Uh-oh. The Sophists, those traveling teachers who claim they could teach virtue and charge money for it. How does Anytus react?
He explodes. He absolutely lays into the Sophists, calls them a plague, corrupters of the youth, says they should be driven out of the city.
Wow, strong reaction. Does he know them personally?
That's the kicker, Socrates asked him, and Anytus admits he's had no dealings with any Sophists whatsoever.
So he condemns them without any direct experience.
Yep. He just knows they're bad. He insists any decent Athenian gentleman is a better teacher of virtue than those frauds.
Any Athenian gentleman. Okay, so Socrates picks up on that suggestion.
He does. He asks Anytus, okay, let's consider these gentlemen. What about the greatest Athenian statesmen we've had? Themistocles, Aristides, Pericles, Thucydides, these legends. Were they teachers of virtue? Could they pass it on?
And the argument is?
Socrates points out the awkward fact. These incredibly capable, virtuous men spared no expense teaching their own sons practical skills, horsemanship, wrestling, music, whatever. They hired the best masters. But did their sons turn out to be as virtuous or wise as their fathers?
Generally, no. History suggests they often didn't live up to their fathers' reputations.
Exactly. Socrates asks, if these great men were able to teach virtue, wouldn't they surely have taught it to their own sons above all else? The fact they didn't implies.
That maybe it couldn't be taught, even by the best of them.
That's the blunt conclusion Socrates draws from this evidence. If even the most admired citizens couldn't transmit virtue to their own kids, then it looks like virtue just isn't teachable.
How does Anytus take that, suggesting these revered figures failed as teachers?
He gets really angry. He clearly feels Socrates is insulting these great men, and by extension, maybe guys like himself. He gives Socrates this chilling warning. You should be careful speaking ill of people like that.
Oof. Yeah, knowing what happens later, that's heavy.
Definitely some dramatic irony there.
So Anytus leaves in a huff. What about Meno?
Well, Meno confirms that this confusion isn't just Socrates' idea. He says even among the gentlemen Ennius praised, there's disagreement about whether virtue can be taught.
So no consensus there either.
And Socrates adds another layer, pointing out that even the respected poet Theognis seems to contradict himself in his own writings on whether virtue is teachable.
Okay, so the search for teachers is coming up completely empty.
Pretty much. Within the dialogue's argument, neither the professional claimants, the Sophists, who Anytus hates, and who even Gorgias apparently didn't claim to teach virtue specifically,
Right.
nor the respected citizens who failed with their own sons and can't even agree among themselves. Neither group seems to be reliable teachers of virtue.
So the empirical search fails. And what does that mean for their hypothesis?
It leads them back to the hypothesis. If there are no teachers, then there are no students.
And if there are no teachers or students...
And then virtue is not taught.
But wait, didn't they just reason that virtue is knowledge and knowledge is teachable? Now they're concluding it's not taught. That seems like a flat contradiction.
It does. They've hit another major puzzle, or aporia. Their logical argument concluded virtue should be teachable, but their real-world search suggests it isn't.
So what gives? If virtue isn't taught knowledge, how do good people even exist? How do they manage to lead good lives or guide cities well?
This forces Socrates to introduce another crucial distinction. He brings up the idea of right opinion orthodoxa.
Right opinion. Okay, how is that different from knowledge?
He uses a great analogy. Imagine you want to get to the city of Larissa.
Right.
Someone who knows the way, who has traveled it and understands the route, can guide you there successfully. That's like knowledge.
Makes sense.
But what about someone who has never been there, doesn't know the way for sure, but just has a strong, correct belief or opinion about which road is the right one?
If their opinion happens to be right, they can still lead you there just as well, right?
Exactly. For the practical purpose of getting to Larissa, the person with right opinion is just as effective a guide as the person with knowledge.
So this suggests maybe good people, good leaders, are guided by right opinion, not necessarily by deep, reasoned knowledge.
That's the possibility Socrates introduces. It would explain how people can act virtuously or lead effectively without virtue being teachable as knowledge.
But hang on, if right opinion is just as good in practice, why do we value knowledge more? Why bother striving for knowledge if a correct guess works just as well?
Excellent question. Socrates addresses this with another famous analogy, the statues of Daedalus.
Daedalus, the mythical craftsman?
Yes. His statues were said to be so incredibly lifelike that they would literally walk away and escape unless you tied them down.
Okay. Bit weird, but okay.
Socrates compares true opinions to these untethered statues. They are beautiful, they're useful for a time, but they aren't stable. They don't stay put in the soul. They can run away.
Meaning you might forget them or lose confidence in them or be persuaded otherwise?
Precisely. They lack grounding. Knowledge, on the other hand, is like a Daedalus statue that has been tied down.
Tied down how?
By the tie of the cause, aetios logismos. That means figuring out the reason why the opinion is true, understanding the explanation, connecting it to other truths. For Socrates, this is essentially the process of recollection, leading to genuine understanding.
So knowledge is stable, grounded, reasoned belief. Right opinion is correct belief, but it's unstable, ungrounded. It might get you to Larissa today, but it might desert you tomorrow.
That's the distinction. Knowledge is prized for its stability and explanatory power, even if right opinion can be practically effective in the short term.
Okay, so back to virtue. Since they concluded virtue isn't taught because no teachers.
It implies virtue, as commonly found, is in that stable, bound knowledge.
So the best explanation for good people
is that they're operating on right opinion. They have correct beliefs about what to do, how to act, how to lead, but without that deeper, reasoned understanding of why.
And Socrates takes this even further, doesn't he? He connects it to something almost divine.
He does. He concludes that people who achieve great things, who guide states successfully, but do so without this reasoned knowledge, they must be operating somewhat like prophets or diviners or even poets inspired by the gods.
Like they're channeling something.
Kind of. They speak truths, they act correctly, but without fully grasping the reasons why through their own intellect. It's like an intuition, an instinct, a form of divine inspiration or guidance.
So virtue for most good people comes by divine gift or divine dispensation. That's the phrase he uses.
Yes, not from nature,
Yeah.
innate, not from teaching as knowledge, but as this kind of inspired right opinion. It arrives without that stable, reasoned understanding accompanying it.
Unless someone actually did achieve true reasoned knowledge of virtue.
Right. Socrates allows for that possibility. Someone who truly understood virtue, who had tied it down with the tie of the cause, could potentially teach it. Such a person would be like a real object among shadows, truly unique. But the dialogue suggests such people are, at best, extremely rare.
Wow, okay. So after that whole winding journey, starting with can virtue be taught, hitting the wall of defining it, the torpedo fish confusion, the theory of recollection, the slave boy demo, the hypothesis about knowledge, the failed search for teachers, they land here.
They land on virtue. For most practical purposes in the real world they observe, being a kind of divinely inspired right opinion.
Okay, let's just quickly recap that path. We started with Meno's very direct question, can you teach virtue?
Which immediately ran into Socrates saying, hold on, I don't even know what virtue is.
Yeah.
Leading to Meno's failed attempts at definition in the list, the power to rule.
Then the torpedo shock, that state of aporia, realizing you don't know.
Followed by Meno's paradox, how can you even search for what you don't know?
Which prompted Socrates' theory of recollection. Learning is remembering what the immortal soul already knew. Demonstrated, sort of, with the slave boy and the geometry problem.
Yeah, demonstrating that inquiry is possible because the knowledge is latent within.
Then back to virtue via hypothesis. If virtue is knowledge, then it's teachable. They argued virtue is a kind of knowledge because it's always good, and only wisdom makes things always good.
But the crucial step failed.
Yeah.
They couldn't find any reliable teachers, not the sophists, not the great statesmen via their sons, leading to the conclusion, virtue is not taught.
Which created the final problem. How are there good people then? Solved by introducing right opinion, practically useful, but unstable.
Leading to the final idea in the dialogue. Virtue usually comes as a divine gift, like inspired right opinion, not as stable, teachable knowledge.
It's really striking, isn't it? They end up offering an answer to how virtue is acquired, this divine gift idea, but they never actually settled Socrates' very first crucial question.
Exactly. What is virtue? They kind of bypassed it. Socrates wanted to start there, but Meno's impatience and then the whole teacher problem diverted them. The dialogue ends without a definition.
Which leaves us, the listeners, with the fascinating place to pause and think. If virtue, for most people, is this sort of unexamined right opinion, maybe divinely guided, what does that mean for us? What's the value of doing what Socrates wanted to do, actually struggling to achieve a reasoned, stable knowledge of virtue?
Does pursuing that Socratic goal of understanding why, of tying down those true opinions, actually change the nature of the virtue itself? Does it elevate it from a gift to something more humanly achievable, maybe even shareable?
Could that deep understanding be the missing link that would make it teachable in a way the statesmen and sophists couldn't manage? Plato leaves you hanging, doesn't he? With a provisional answer, but an even bigger set of questions about the ultimate goal of seeking wisdom.